podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Claudia Day, and in this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to expert coaches and thought leaders who share their passion for generating self-awareness through insight tools. Our aim is to inspire and explore with you some of the most impactful tools available to us coaches and leaders. Hello, everyone. Welcome today. We have Julia Carden with us. She's a practicing coach and supervisor, also a visiting tutor at Henley Business School. She has been researching the topic of self-awareness. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'll let you introduce yourself, Julia, and tell us a bit more as to why you went to research this topic.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for having me today. I think you've said enough from the introduction, really. But I suppose the other thing I would say, I describe myself as a practitioner with an academic underpinning since I've done my research. I also sometimes introduce myself. I don't know if you've seen the advert where they say, born somewhere and made in the Royal Navy. Well, I was born and raised in Cornwall and made in the Royal Navy. I spent my first 10 years of working life as an officer in the Royal Navy. So you asked me why I search self-awareness. So I want to just say, first of all, I've always been fascinated with self-awareness. It came into my awareness as a concept when I started my leadership training. And very early on, I was introduced to the simple concept of the Johari window, where what's known to self and what's known to others. And of course, there's that box, what's unknown to self and unknown to others. And I thought, I want to know what's in that box. Let me discover that box. So that's what piqued the interest. And then as I went through my career, I specialised in assessment and development centres for some time. And self-awareness was often being assessed in assessment and development centres. It was being discussed. So that was interesting, and I could see some value in that. And then when I started my coach training, the thing that I realised when I was doing my master's, it wasn't the academic learning I was doing around the psychology that was enhancing how I showed up as a coach, although that does help. What was really enhancing how I showed up as a coach was the work I was doing on myself and the development of self-awareness. And then I was thinking, why isn't that a core competency of all the coaching bodies if this is so important? And there was a little bit of work on it. So that's really what started my interest in it. And I thought I want to research it some more. I feel it's so important. I want to research it some more. So that was what piqued my interest. And that's where I started from.
It's a fascinating topic and something so difficult to grasp at the same time. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it and your exploration. I'm, of course, in the midlife period, and they say that this is a point where, of course, we look even more into ourselves. So definitely, this may be why I chose to do this topic unconsciously, this series. You mentioned a bit about it, but I guess why should we care about self-awareness? As in, why should a coachee also care about self-awareness? I've had people who say, I'm fine how I am. I don't need to know anything else about myself in an argument as if they need coaching or not. So why self-awareness? Why do we need to explore here?
Great question. And in fact, I had a coaching sponsor that I've been doing some work with a while ago. And quite frankly, I think it's him that needs the coaching, not the people he's been sending to me. And I challenged him on who was supporting him, who was his thinking partner, and what support did he have? And his response to me was, I'm very self-aware. I don't think I need coaching at all. So your question is very apt. Of course, the fact he said, I'm very self-aware, my belief is he probably wasn't at all, because once you start delving into self-awareness, it's a very dynamic construct, and we can never be fully self-aware because we're always learning more about ourselves. We're having new experiences, which reveals more about us. We're in new groups, which reveals more. And you talked about midlife, that will raise more. It's a great question. Why bother? This is my perspective of why bother. And of course, there'll be others' perspectives there. And I know if you read Daniel Goleman, he talks about it being a key part of emotional intelligence. Jim Collins, in his book Good to Great, talks about that the self-aware leaders are the great leaders, and that was differentiates. So there's that perspective. I think there's more to that. So what my research highlighted is that self-awareness is the route to deeper connection with self. And when I think about deeper connection with self, part of that is accepting ourselves, accepting who we are, being comfortable in our own skin. And when we get to that point, and this is why it's never ending, because there's always new things that shake us as we go along. But when we get to that point when we're comfortable in our own skin, we are connected with ourselves, firstly, we can connect with others at a much deeper level. There's a beautiful quote in the work of Yetunde Hoffman, who talks about love-based organisations. And Yetunde talks about that love is the acceptance of all of who I am and the acceptance of all of who you are. And I think self-awareness is that route through to that self-acceptance. Now, once I've got there and I've accepted myself, I've connected to myself, I can start to delatch my self-worth and my ego from outcomes. So what does that then enable in me as a coach or a leader? It means I can start sitting with uncertainty. I can start sitting with not knowing, and I can start to embrace others' perspectives. I might not agree with them all, but I can respect them and acknowledge them. So you can imagine then, as a coachee, as a leader, that's hugely powerful, because we're working in a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, ambiguous world. So we're faced with uncertainty all the time, these wicked problems where we can then just hold the space and start seeing what's emerging. And it will probably give us more possibilities. And I've got to make a decision now, because if I make a decision now, everybody's going to think I'm brilliant. Actually, your decision may be shit if you don't sit with all those possibilities. So for me, self-awareness is the route to that space. Keats, the poet, talked about negative capability. And that, for me, sums up that sitting with uncertainty, that delatching of ego from self-worth. And I can give you that absolute definition of what Keats said. He described it as capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. So that's why I think self-awareness is so critical for coaches and leaders.
1,000 questions come to mind. That's very fascinating to hear, especially that ability to sit with uncertainty. It's a nice outlook, so to say, as something to look forward to once you gain more self-awareness. In terms of a way of defining it, how would you define self-awareness after your research?
Oh my goodness. So you can read my academic papers if you can bear to go through the academic writing space. So the first thing, I want to just give a few headlines. It's a very complex construct. It's a dynamic construct and evolving. But in terms of defining it, I love the concept of what are the components that make up self-awareness, or ingredients if you like cooking. And there are two groups of components. There's the interpersonal components, which are how do others see me? How am I in relation to others? How am I showing up in the world? And I would put those first for coaches and leaders, because we're doing self-awareness for the purpose of working with others and being with others. There's the interpersonal components, us in relation to others, what others see. Then there's the intrapersonal components. They're ones that we can discover ourselves, that are inward looking, that come from reflection. And they would be things like values and beliefs, strengths and weaknesses, motivations, our internal mental, emotional state, and our internal mental cognitive state, and then our physiological responses. So they're within us. So they're the components. And if you want a nice definition, I define it as self-awareness consists of a range of intrapersonal and interpersonal components in order to help us have deeper connections with others. That's how I've defined it as a verbal, but I have a pictorial, visual definition which shows all those components, which I like the visual. So that stands out for me more.
Yes, the ingredients bring it to life, because when you have this big concept of something, it feels big, as you say. And so to break it down into those components does bring an easier view of it. You were mentioning, of course, that when you're looking at yourself, there's beliefs and there's your values and those things that dictate, that is information that you know about yourself. In terms of how other people see you, are there also some things that break it down? Would it be the same ones, as in how they see my values to be, how they perceive my beliefs to be, or is it something else?
So the two components in the interpersonal category are others' perceptions and the behaviours. So how do others view us? How do they feel in our presence? How do they experience us? And of course, in them assessing us, which is what they're doing, or judging us, if you want to use that word, developing their perception of us, that's based on their map of the world, which is the intrapersonal of their world. So their values and beliefs are like filters for how they then perceive us. They will filter their perceptions of us through their values and their beliefs, their feelings, their thoughts. The behaviours, how others see us, that's our body language, our tone of voice, volume of our voice, our pace of delivery, the words we choose, all of that. And again, others have different views about body language, probably based on their values and beliefs. So how others perceive us is based on values. So there's no absolute truth. There's no absolute one truth on those interpersonal components, which is why you're never fully self-aware, because we never know everybody's perceptions of us, and neither are we willing to hear everybody's perceptions on us. We think we are.
And they will be very different, because everyone has a different building. And so they will see us, perceive us differently.
And can I just add, I think the other thing is, so my research was based on a Western sample population. I do think self-awareness is a largely Western concept as a whole construct. Now, if I possibly, and I haven't researched this enough, so I'm speaking tentatively in this space, when you see Buddhism practicing mindfulness, that is a route, I believe, to self-awareness. I absolutely know it is a route to self-awareness. There's some great research out there. What I don't know is if that culture would talk about self-awareness as a concept or a construct. So I do think it's Western. This is possibly where some more research would happen about how globally accepted is the concept of self-awareness.
Yes, it's similar to emotions, where in different countries emotions are spoken about or not. We will have some episodes on culture, so that will be an interesting point to bring up. Thank you for bringing it up today. You were mentioning about this exploration, and there are, of course, people who think they already know themselves. There are others who are very keen to understand their whole build-up. And for others, it might seem scary as well to go into that. Could you tell us a bit more about the research that has been done as to the benefits of self-awareness, of understanding more self-awareness? You've mentioned some of it, but there's more.
So I think you highlight, so the first people that really wrote about it was in the late 60s, a couple of researchers called Duval and Wickland. And interestingly, self-awareness was then designated, I think that's the right word, as an aversive state. And they talked about it being a state rather than a trait. And it was aversive, they believed, because it led to people ruminating and then perhaps getting depressed and getting increased anxiety. So that is still a risk. If we do this work on ourselves, it can lead to some anxiety and negative responses. So I think that still is a risk. Now, I think it is a positive state if we do it from a reflective capacity, with a reflective mindset, with a mindset of curiosity, and with self-compassion in mind. So I think that's important to have. The benefits for me is ultimately this: the more work I do on self in that self-compassionate, reflective capacity, it is about me getting more comfortable in my own skin. And that relates to happiness and relates to loving oneself. And that's got to be a healthy place to be, rather than the negative place of feeling not good enough or beating oneself up. Or I feel it helps us work towards being contentment and joyful in our lives.
With this in mind, what ways of developing it do we have at our disposal?
There's not one way. There's not one magic wand. There's not, I'll go and do this course, or I'll do this psychometric profile, or I'll work with a coach for 6 months, or I'll do a 360 and bam. I think we need lots of different ways to help us. I think it takes time. I think the other thing is there's something there about what are our learning styles and learning preferences. And can we do the work with somebody that we feel safe enough with? So I think there's lots of ways. So I don't want to say there's one way. My research highlighted, and of course my research was focused on the development of self-awareness for coaches rather than the coachees, that reflective activities were the ones that enabled the deepening of self-awareness the most. So that might be reflective practice with a coaching supervisor, or with a therapist, or with a coach, or a combination of all, journaling, a reflective practice for the body, which might be a yoga or a mindfulness sitting practice. But I actually came up with the concept that it was like a jigsaw puzzle, and that we needed lots of different pieces of the jigsaw to really get self-aware. And the other thing I realised is that we can't really develop self-awareness if we don't know what it is. I'd be merrily thinking, I've been developing my self-awareness through reflective practice. And of course, when I got really granular with what is self-awareness, with all those components, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I've never really paid any attention to that component. Or maybe I've not spent enough on that component. So I feel that the way I've defined it helps people think this year or this week or this month, actually, if I spent some time there, that would really help me. And we actually need to spend time developing all the components. We might need different methods for different elements, or the different components, different moments for different components, which is why the jigsaw puzzle fits. And there might be a stage of life thing as well there.
Yes. And of course, in this series, we'll be talking about insight tools to create self-awareness. What are your thoughts about insight tools in general, and how to understand better which ones to use in order to help a coachee or help ourselves as coaches to increase and improve our self-awareness?
I suppose it depends what you mean by an insight tool, because we've got psychometrics, which are licensed and you have to buy, like Luminous Spark or Savile Wave or Hogan. You've also got free tools like this. There's a strengths questionnaire and quizzes. So they're all out there and they're available. What do I think about them? I think they give a small piece of the jigsaw puzzle. So they're not the be all and end all. And I think the danger is, and I think I've been guilty of this in the past, I don't think, in fact, I know I've been guilty of this in the past, that we start taking them as the gospel, that this is telling us all that we need to know. It's giving us all of our strengths and weaknesses, it's telling how I should feel, and this is my values and this. But it's just a perspective, first of all. And also, we answer the questions that give us the results. So there's something about, are we trying, maybe unconsciously, to present ourselves in a way that the person give us the feedback on that tool is going to view us? So there's that to take into account. I think for them to be of maximum value, for me, they have to be a robust tool. And so what do I mean by a robust tool? They have to be well researched with good reliability and validity data, a good sample population. And that's pretty key for me. So I like tools that I know that there's been that quality of research that's gone on behind them. So, for example, Luminous Spark, I know Stuart Desson did lots of research behind that. The Hogan profile as well has got lots of data behind that. So that's important for me. But, and there is a but with this, that for me is really to process what that means to me, what that profile means to me now, in the here and now, what it means for myself. I need to then sit down with a coach or a therapist and work through it. And also think about how does it link to other things. So I do just think it gives you one element and one perspective at that moment in time. And a different moment in time is going to give a different perspective. So I think the danger with them is we can start putting ourselves in a box and not really being still curious and not really still developing ourselves. So that's my concern with them. But they are there and they are a tool. They are a part of a jigsaw for sure.
So definitely something to look at the research that has backed them and their reliability and validity. There is also, of course, to hold them lightly and to make sure that the Gucci guides us and not to pigeonhole anybody. So you've mentioned there are quite a few things too, of course, that are very important when working with a tool. When you're using these insight tools, it can have positive things and it can bring something into awareness that wasn't. And it can be, as Claire Pedrick said, language for something that has been a mystery for them, in the same way as in coaching, you can put into language things that have been a mystery. However, there is, of course, a fear of a risk in this, that you may be also cementing beliefs. And so what is your view on this about the risk and the benefit, or the risk of using and cementing a belief?
I absolutely agree that it can cement an unhelpful belief or take you down a false avenue. I suppose an example would be, and I think if you had my colleague William McKee on here, he would have some strong views. I'm just going to talk about the Myers-Briggs type indicator from a personal perspective. I'm not going to comment on the validity or reliability because they have got data. I know that. But every time I did it in my early time, I came out as an ESTJ, which might not mean anything to your listeners, but if they look at Myers-Briggs and ESTJ. And that's fairly typical of military officers as well. Most military officers sit in that category. So, of course, that's the first time I did it. And I have been brought up as stiff British upper lip, don't show your emotions, all that stuff. But what I've discovered through working with my psychoanalytical therapist is really I'm not an ESTJ. I've got such a high feeling preference, but it's been buried and I've not learnt to use it. So for years I kept believing, I'm a hard, cold-nosed, directly. I have got some direction in there, but underneath it, there's all this feeling and soft stuff which I thought wasn't appropriate to share or bring out. And I remember a colleague of mine described me as a chocolate minstrel, hard on the outside, but soft inside. And I think really, I just thought, no, I'm just this hard person. So it really reinforced something that was not helpful to me. So I think that's the danger. That is a danger of them, particularly the type-based tests, which tend to put you in a type rather than the trait, which gives you a bigger picture. And of course, they say with traits that you can develop them over time and they can change. So it is very much how they're presented. And I think also the culture you're in, be that the family system and or the organisational culture you're in, can reinforce something that's probably not your true self. And of course, we do things to fit in because that's our natural ability. So finding that true self, and that means possibly breaking free from the herd, the tribe that you're in.
Julia, just thinking about how nicely you have framed the recipe and the ingredients for awareness, I was thinking if in that same way for the listeners, if you could explain a bit more about the difference between self-awareness, self-consciousness, and self-knowledge, and how to think about them in a more clear way.
Yeah, really important question. I noticed when I first started my research that the terms were used really interchangeably and were often all confused and muddled up together. So this is what my research highlighted and how I'm now defining them. So self-consciousness is the intrapersonal elements, components of self-awareness. So self-consciousness is part of self-awareness and the intrapersonal. Now, I know there's some writers on self-consciousness, Trapnell and Campbell, that would disagree with me. But the reason I've bracketed like that is so we can put some boundaries around these terms and get clear. So self-consciousness is the intrapersonal components of self-awareness, whereas self-knowledge is the output of self-awareness. So having developed self-awareness, I gather and gain self-knowledge. So self-knowledge is the output. So that's how I've bracketed them and boundaried them up. And I think that's important so we get construct clarity and we stop using them interchangeably.
Thank you for that. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience about your research, your experience, your self-search of your journey on the search of self-awareness?
So I would have loved my research outcome to be, I've now developed my self-awareness. The work can stop. Sadly, that's not been the case. It is ongoing work and it never stops. I also want to just highlight, I know there's been some discussions on LinkedIn around, can we be too self-aware? And my answer to that is no, we can't, because we're continually developing it and we're continually evolving as human beings. I think the too much self-awareness comes from when we end up trying to work on ourselves and we get that ruminative, that anxious, negative state of mind. So I don't believe we can be too self-aware. And Lawrence Barrett has got this lovely quote. I'm going to attach it to self-awareness. I don't know whether he's happy with that, but I think it sums up to me that we're never fully done. We're never fully developed. And what Lawrence said was, it is an elusive image that slips away from us as soon as we feel we can grasp it. And that's it. That's why we can never be too self-aware. We're always evolving and developing it. And I think that leader that said to me, oh, I don't need coaching, I'm already self-aware, absolutely highlights you're not. Because if you had self-awareness, you would know that's not the case.
And of course, we've only touched on the tip of this topic. Where else can the audience go and read about it?
If they're interested in my research, if they go to my website, carden-consulting.co.uk, all my 3 academic published papers are on that website, and also the visual representation of how I've defined it is on the website. There's a whole page on self-awareness. I've just signed a contract for the publisher, so I am writing a book in this space. Of course, there are other writers in this space. Tasha Ulrich wrote the book Insight, Daniel Goleman's books on emotional intelligence. So there are other perspectives. I believe where my research is different is that I've actually defined the construct at a really granular level. I've defined it within the context of adult development, and that's where I think I've got something different to add to the other writers.
Looking forward to reading that book then when it comes out. Where can the audience connect with you?
Yeah, so through my website, carden-consulting.co.uk, or on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn and connect with me that way as well.
Thank you so much, Julia, for coming and talking to us about this today and preparing us for the series. It will be interesting to hear as well and to try and understand which insight tool helps us to develop in each one of those ingredients that you mentioned. So which one increases my motivation or beliefs and values or understanding of motivation. And so thank you for this.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make sustainable differences to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our website at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, member benefit interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching experience.